Hey, it's Nate Paff here. On today's episode, I'm discussing the Beatles' best year. The Beatles had an unmatched run of 7 years from 1963 to 69. No other band can compete with the level of both commercial and artistic success they experienced in these 7 years. Nor has any other band demonstrated the year-over-year growth and range of styles that the Beatles were able to master during these 7 years. They released their first album in 1963, and I think every year from then until 1969, when they stopped recording albums, deserve consideration as their best year. And to be more specific, I'm looking at their best year musically, not commercially or culturally. 1964 would probably rank at the top if we were measuring cultural success, but I don't think any critic would argue that 1964 was their best year musically. So moving chronologically, I'll explore each of the Beatles' 7 years in which they were recording albums to determine which year contained the best music. Starting with 1963. 63 was their massive breakout year. They recorded their first album, Please Please Me, almost entirely in a single day in February. Released it in the UK in March. It reached #1 in May of 63 and stayed there for 8 months until it was replaced by their next album, With the Beatles, which stayed at #1 for another 5 months. Now this was specific to England, as no Beatles album was released in the States in 1963 because of the way record labels worked back then. Also in 1963, they showed an extraordinary talent for creating hit singles, as they released in 1963, I Wanna Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, This Boy, From Me to You. These singles took pop music to new heights. Musically, some of the songs to come out of 63 hold up surprisingly well. Love Me Do is of course a classic. All I've Gotta Do, I Saw Her Standing There, Ask Me Why. These songs definitely show their melodic and rhythmic talent. But overall, the albums to come out of 1963 lack the consistency and depth that we'll hear from them in a few years. The instrumentation can sound dated, and the range of subjects in their songwriting is certainly limited. It's really just about girls and nothing else. And a lot of the songs they recorded during this period were covers. 12 out of the 28 songs on their first 2 albums were not original works. But their ear for catchy melodies, their vocal range, and the power of their vocal harmonies were on full display in 1963. They were already like a force of nature. But because of the lack of consistency and maturity, I'd put 1963 at the bottom of the list. 1964 is when they really became a global phenomenon. 1964 may have been the most successful year for any musical act in history. They arrived in New York in early February and played Ed Sullivan in front of 73 million people. They then embarked on the most impactful tour in the history of music. But musically, was this one of their best years? I wouldn't say so. A Hard Day's Night as a film and a soundtrack was a massive success. Critics were gushing. But musically, I don't think the songs of A Hard Day's Night hold up very well. It lacks nuance and seems more focused on pleasing a mass audience than making an artistic statement. Their second 1964 album, Beatles for Sale, also lacks consistency, and 6 of the 14 songs were covers. But Beatles for Sale has some great songs. You can hear some hints of Rubber Soul and even Revolver on this album, with Paul's exceptional work on bass, its folky, soulful rhythms, and the maturing sound of John and Paul as songwriters. No Reply, the opening track, is one of the best opening songs of any of their albums. It's not Come Together or Taxman good, but it's maybe a notch below. The songs Baby in Black, I'll Follow the Sun, What You're Doing, these are great early Beatles songs that are worth revisiting. Words of Love, their cover of the 1957 Buddy Holly song, is my favorite cover that they ever recorded. There's an amazing warmth and richness in their vocal harmonies. In November of 64, they released the I Feel Fine, She's a Woman single, which I think is the best single they had released up to that point, and belongs in the discussion as a top 5 Beatles single. In terms of cultural significance and overall impact, 1964 is probably their most important year. But I'm measuring the quality of the music. And based on the quality of the music to come out of 1964, I think it deserves to be placed in the 6th spot. 1965 was another year of rapid musical growth. They released Help in August as a soundtrack to another highly successful film. In the same month, they set a new attendance record when they played to over 55,000 people at Shea Stadium in New York. 1965 was the year of cannabis for the Beatles, with Ringo saying, "A hell of a lot of pot was being smoked while we were making the film Help." It was great. If you look at a picture of us, you can see the red-eyed shots. They were red from the dope we were smoking. They knew that very little would get done after lunch. In the afternoon, we would very seldom get past the first line of the script. We had such hysterics that no one could do anything. Yesterday is the album's gem, but songs like I've Just Seen a Face, Tell Me What You See, and Help were also some of their strongest work up to that point. Help was their first album to be nominated for a Grammy. Of course, the main highlight of 1965 was the December release of Rubber Soul. This is a top 3 album for a lot of Beatles fans, and many critics recognize it as belonging in the conversation as one of the best albums ever made, and certainly one of the most significant. John said of Rubber Soul that it was, quote, "a matter of having all experienced the recording studio and having grown musically. We were more precise about making the album, and we took over the album cover and everything." George Harrison said that Rubber Soul was his favorite Beatles album, and Ringo Starr described it as, quote, "the departure record. George Martin said of Rubber Soul, quote, "For the first time we began to think of albums as an art on their own, as complete entities." Rubber Soul was their first start-to-finish great album. The single Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out were also recorded during the Rubber Soul sessions. Rubber Soul may be their most historically significant album, as it signaled their departure away from music made to be performed live towards more carefully crafted musical works of art. For fans who are partial to early Beatles, 1965 could be seen as one of, if not their best year. I wouldn't go that far. I'm putting it at the number 5 spot. 1966 is more broadly among the greatest years in the history of rock music. In 1966, Bob Dylan, the Beach Boys, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles made some of their best music. It's also in the conversation as the best year for the Beatles. Starting in April of '66, they began a phase of extraordinary sophistication and creativity in their songwriting and musical production. In April alone, they recorded Taxman, Eleanor Rigby, I'm Only Sleeping, Love You Too, And Your Bird Can Sing, Gotta Get You Into My Life, Tomorrow Never Knows, Dr. Robert, Paperback Writer, and maybe best of all, Rain. So as far as a single month goes, April of '66 is probably their best. A few of the great songs released in '67 were actually recorded in '66, like When I'm 64, Strawberry Fields, and part of Penny Lane. I'll include these songs as a product of 1966. So clearly 1966 belongs in the conversation as their best year. So does 1967. Sgt. Pepper was released in May and was a total game changer. Probably the most historically significant rock album ever made, and arguably the best. Early '67 was a creative high point for the Beatles, in particular in March of '67, when they recorded most of Sgt. Pepper. In the summer of '67, they recorded other high points like All You Need Is Love, Baby You're a Rich Man, Hello Goodbye, I Am the Walrus, and Fool on the Hill. Their manager Brian Epstein said that their Our World performance of All You Need Is Love in front of 400 million people on live TV was their, quote, finest moment. And maybe no other moment better captures the musical and spiritual aesthetic of the 1960s. Its lyrics, its optimism can serve as a North Star in times of despair. So 1967 could be at number 1. Let's see how it stacks up against the next 2 years. The musical differences between 1967 and '68 can be summarized by the differences between the covers of Sgt. Pepper and the White Album. If 1967 saw them decorating their songs with as much color and brilliance as was possible, '68 was back to the basics. Stripped down, more garage band style rock and roll, acoustic, folk, soul sounds, less about their combustible musical chemistry as a band, and more about their individual talents. The White Album is a favorite for some, but song for song, I don't see it as one of their strongest albums. I see 1968 as a kind of hangover year off the highs of 1966 and '67. LSD and cannabis, the drugs that did seem to expand their musical horizons and ideas on what was possible, no longer packed the powerful punch of a novelty drug. By '68, those drugs were no longer fresh, and they had already reached their musical summit and were looking for something new, a new sound or a path that would lead them to new terrain. Meditation, Mahesh Yogi, Yoko Ono, these 1968 highlights weren't quite as colorful as the '67 offerings. Out of their 4 final years together as a band, I see '68 as their worst. Nevertheless, the songs and experiences that come out of '68 were essential chapters in the highly compelling Beatles story. So that leaves their final year together, 1969, undoubtedly one of their best. By this point, each of the Beatles members had experienced major life changes. John was obsessed with Yoko and struggling with heroin addiction. Paul married Linda in March. George had quit the band in January, only to return 12 days later. Ringo had quit the band the previous year to return soon after, but each of the Beatles, except maybe Paul, were getting really tired of the Beatle experience. They got together in January to make an album that would simultaneously be filmed. George Martin, their producer, said that the project was, quote, not at all a happy recording experience. It was a time when relations between the Beatles were at their lowest ebb. John Lennon described the sessions as, quote, hell, the most miserable on earth. And George Harrison described them as, quote, the low of all time. Looking at the footage of them from this period, they looked strung out. But the music to come out of '69 is incredible. They recorded most of Let It Be in January, and despite how unpleasant the recording experience was, the music still shines. It's like a mix of the underproduced feel of the White Album and the mature musicianship of Abbey Road. After the mixed critical response to the White Album, the lack of cohesiveness heard on Let It Be seemed like further evidence that the Beatles had lost a step. But Let It Be has amazing songs. If looking at just its best 5 songs, it's one of their best albums. Their final project as a band was, of course, Abbey Road, and this was a much less hostile and a more cohesive recording experience. And the music shows. It has some of the mid-'60s Beatles energy mixed with the musical maturity and sophistication of late Beatles. George Martin cited Abbey Road as his favorite Beatles album, and many fans see it as their best. So in total, I see 1969 as definitely deserving consideration as their best year together musically. So it comes down to 66, 67, or 69. Let's compare the total output from these years. Here's their output from 1966. Rain, Dr. Robert, Strawberry Fields, Eleanor Rigby, I'm Only Sleeping, Taxman, Paper Wreck Writer, When I'm 64, Gotta Get You Into My Life, Tomorrow Never Knows. Talk about a top 10 of songs released in a single year. She Said, Yellow Submarine, counting Penny Lane as half a song because half of it was written in 66. Talk about a consistency start to finish of an output in a single year. This might be their most consistent year song to song of any of the years in which they were recording music. Moving on to 1967, Getting Better, Fixing a Hole, Within You Without You, Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. The top of this list may be just as good as 1966. I think I'd give a slight edge to 1966 as far as the top 8 or the top 10. Looking at the bottom half of the list, A Day in the Life, and a lot of people put that as one of their best songs. I think it's an overrated song. Fool in the Hill, I'm the Walrus Flying. The first half of Magical Mystery Tour is certainly a weak patch, but the second half of Magical Mystery Tour is pure magic. So 67 is really close with 66. I think I'm going to give a slight edge to 66, though, in terms of strength of output. So 66 may be their best. Let's look how it stacks up against 1969. So 69 has more songs, 29 and a half tracks across the universe. Half of it was written in 68. But a lot of these bottom tier songs of 69 are not very serious songs. I think Along a Winding Road, for example, is one of their worst songs. For You Blue, Old Brown Shoe, Maggie May, One After 909, these are not serious songs. You could count those as half songs, if that, probably more like quarter songs. And then, of course, the second half of Abbey Road are short songs as well. So this is slightly misleading in terms of the volume of tracks. But if we look at the top end, let's say the top 8, You Never Give Me Your Money, Polythene Pam, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, Golden Slumbers, Get Back, Don't Let Me Down, Sun King, Carry That Weight. That's as good as, I think, the top end of 1966. If 1966 was 100 out of 100 in terms of strength, this might be like 98, 99. Looking at the mid-tier, the 10 to 20, Let It Be, Here Comes the Sun, Two of Us, Dig a Pony, Something, The End, Mean Mr. Mustard, Octopus's Garden, I Want You, She's So Heavy. So I see 1969 as stacking up really well against 1966. If we look at 66 again, it really is going to come down to that second tier of songs. Are they as strong as the second tier that we see in 69? Tomorrow Never Knows, She Said, And Your Bird Can Sing, For No One, Half of Penny Lane. These are great songs. But I think songs like Let It Be, Here Comes the Sun, Two of Us, Dig a Pony, Something, The End, I Want You, She's So Heavy, I think those songs are a little bit better than the 1966 songs. So I'm going to give a slight edge to 1969 as their best year. So I think that's extraordinary. Their last year together, 1969, when they're strung out, they're sick of each other. The footage of them shows them looking pretty sickly, hungover and exhausted from an unprecedented run of musical success. But in that year, they produced what I see as the best output of music of any of their years together. It says a lot about the chemistry and the talent that they had as a band. Thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to my channel, and please let me know if you agree with 1969 as their best year. I'd love to hear your response. Let me know where you agree and disagree. Thanks for watching.